Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace at 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. Back in the 50s and 60s, you could find no more racist state in America than Alabama. Swampland and urban squalor, blacks getting hosed down, and the overt fears of one race towards another was revealed. These overt acts of hostility provided character development from folks like my get at the earth, how to heal it, bring the sea level down just a little because the fever is always there, playing the same chromatic scales over and over again until the audience got the point, tripping their faces off after a 21-minute mountain jam, or branching off to play with the Stones or Eric Clapton. Chuck Leavell, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh, Jake, what a nice intro, man. Well, it's just wonderful to be with you, and thanks for inviting me on.
Well, I got to tell you, I always love to get the Southern gentleman on this program, man. I dig the region of the South so much. I believe that the southeastern region of this country offers so much love, and it can get confused sometimes with vitriol and this kind of stuff. But you're not. But those cats. You're one of them, man, and it's a trip to talk to you, brother. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Well, and I appreciate the comments about the South. As my brother Bobby Keys, who, as you know, plays saxophone with the Stones, says, the Earth is a southern planet.
Chuck, I wanted to ask you, by the way, I did an interview with Ozzy Allers. He sends his love to you very much. I did it yesterday. But I wanted to ask you, growing up, can you talk a little bit about the kinds of visuals that you were seeing in Montgomery or in Alabama, and how much of a in your music, how much were you guys consciously pushing back against that kind of overt racism?
Well, first of all, I was born in Birmingham. My family did move to Montgomery for a while, back to Birmingham, and eventually we settled in Tuscaloosa. Roll Tide, by the way. And so it was, I think by the time I got to Tuscaloosa, I was in the sixth grade, and spent my years from then on until I left Alabama and went to Macon, Georgia. So, the point being that I grew up in a college town. Tuscaloosa was a great place to grow up, but as we all recall, there was incredible turmoil going on there when George Wallace was governor, and he stood in the steps of the University of Alabama refusing entry to a black student. They were turbulent times. It was very difficult times, but it was also the beginning of a generation that wanted to get beyond all that. And all of my friends, the people, the guys most of the guys that I were hanging out with and girls wanted to get beyond all that turmoil and trouble and civil rights. So we wanted equal rights for women, equal rights for blacks, equal rights for everyone. And but it was difficult to be in that atmosphere with Wallace on the courthouse steps, with parades going down through the center of Tuscaloosa with KKK members participating. Very, very difficult. And, there was the prejudice, by the way, was not only against blacks. I was a hippie, man. I was playing in bands. I had long hair.
No, I know. Dude, I have been on a major Leavell kick. I mean, you were on fire, but yeah, I mean, you were in the target too. You were in the firing squad there.
And I think that helped those of us that were musicians and going through this phase to better understand the prejudice issue against the blacks. I'm sure you did some research about the fact that I played with a black band called the Jades. They were a great band from Stillman College.
Please talk about. No, actually, I was going to focus in on the Hourglass, but why don't we talk about this band first? This black band.
Well, I was very young when this occurred. I must have been maybe 15 years old. And the Jades were a five-piece group, and they were like the Temptation to the Four Tops. They danced, they sang. There were four guys that were up front on the stage, not playing any instruments, but doing the dancing and the singing. There was one guy named Freddie, and I can't remember Freddie's last name, but he was a keyboard player, and so he was in the band, featured, but he was kind of relegated to the keyboard. And somehow I met these guys. They were just so talented and really great, and got to know Freddie a little bit. He was older than I was, but a great keyboard player. And so he kind of came to me at a certain point and said, hey, I'd like to be out there dancing with the rest of the cats. Can you, can you play the piano with us, and I'll show you what we're doing, and you can learn some stuff. And that's what happened. And it was fabulous. I learned so much from the guy.
But you were able to go back to your enclave of open-minded friends and be able to share that energy, because I'm sure there were a lot of people that I try to get towards today, Chuck, without getting too esoteric. And again, I am not a historian of the South, but it seems to me, okay, so we don't have a governor who is outrightly standing in front of a school and the National Guard, but then you have something that crops up in Ferguson, Missouri, and you say, well, really, I couldn't ask a better person from a human point of view. Have we evolved since the generation that you, like where you said you guys were taking over, wanted to turn that page? Have we made progress?
Well, not enough, obviously. Some of these sentiments still exist across the country, and I think probably we've dealt with it in the South better than a lot of other places throughout the country. It started, this turmoil obviously started in the South, and we had to deal with it, and I think in a lot of ways we did move on from it. But yeah, it's disheartening, isn't it, to see situations like a Trayvon Martin or a Michael Brown. There's two sides to every story. We all know that, but obviously profiling goes on these days. There's no doubt about it. The statistics show that, and it's a doggone shame.
Yeah, and I also feel like it's actually more like the overt rate. Like you could see these images of people getting dogs being on them, and the Freedom Riders, and the overt nature of it. And I'm 36, so I'm looking at it from my generation. I'm saying, boy, this is a lot more diabolical because it seems a lot more covert. There's a lot more language involved, and I just don't also see the genuine authenticity and leadership, and also justice. Clearly the justice system doesn't work well either. But I just always love. I've talked to Russell Smith, from the Amazing Rhythm Aces, Bill Payne from Little Feat. You're right in that pocket. Dr. John. And I say to myself, well, these guys are the leaders of the South. That's why I love having you on the show, because I want that perspective of somebody who was living there amongst a more homogenized society, but yet battled through and used music as a force of love, really more than anything else, against that hatred. Well,
you hit the nail on the head there, Jake. Music was the healing element for us. It was the element that brought us together, black, white, didn't matter. If you could play, you could play, and we wanted to play with the best musicians we could find. And then, songs that were written to try to help heal these issues. I think, people like Bob Dylan, of course, who has written many great songs concerning civil rights issues and humanitarian issues, and then going beyond that into rock and roll. And it has a healing nature, as we know, and it brings people together, and that's the wonderful thing about it. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do, I think.
And you do it very well, and continue to do it today. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about this band Hourglass. Could you talk a little bit about, because you guys cut an album on Ampex label, I believe?
Well, you might be getting slightly mixed up with Sundown.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is. That's right. Yeah, Sundown. Tell me about Sundown.
Well, here's what happened. I had a mentor in Tuscaloosa, a guy named Paul Hornsby, and Paul was actually in the Hourglass that you mentioned. Paul was a native Alabamian, and had joined up with Greg Allman and Dwayne Allman and some other musicians to form the Hourglass. And they had gone to California. They'd done a couple of records. The band broke up, and Paul came back to Alabama. I met Paul. Paul, by the way, was a piano player and guitar player. Paul taught guitar in Tuscaloosa after he came back on the Hourglass. And so I hooked up with Paul. He was so great. You know, he encouraged me. He encouraged me to sing. He showed me a lot of things on the keyboard. We had a band called the South Camp together, and I was really enjoying the process of learning from Paul. And then all of a sudden, things start to happen in Macon, Georgia, with Capricorn Records. The Allman Brothers Band is formed. They do a record. The label is getting some success. They're looking to sign other artists and to expand the base, so to speak. And so Paul, my mentor, gets a call to go become a studio musician at Capricorn Studios in Macon and to produce records. So, you know, there I am losing my mentor. He's moving to Macon, Georgia. So I said, well, why don't I go over to Macon, Georgia? And I think at this juncture I was maybe 17 years old. And so a good friend of mine, Charlie Hayward, who, by the way, to this day still plays with Charlie Daniels' band.
Wow.
But who we had a band. He was in the South Camp, and we had other bands in Tuscaloosa where we grew up. Charlie and I threw a couple of suitcases in my 65 Oldsmobile Cutlass station wagon and drove over to Macon, Georgia to see what it was all about. Well, it looked like a wide open situation. You know, we had a tour of a state-of-the-art studio. We had a tour of the booking agency that existed there. We had a tour of the offices of the record company. And Paul, our friend and my mentor, said, you know, I think if you guys come over here, we'll just figure out some way to get you into the scene. And the way that went was we hooked up with some guys that were kind of established musicians in the city of Macon, a guy named Asa Howard that sang, and there was a group called the Boogie Chitlin that some of these musicians had worked in Macon. And so we combined, you know, it's kind of like Alabama, Georgia coming together, some musicians that had come over from Tuscaloosa with the Macon guys, and we formed a band called Sundown. You know, quite honestly, it wasn't a very good band, but we were experimenting and we were learning, and this was a record deal. We had a record deal with Ampex Records. There were only 3 records ever put out by that label. Ampex, as some of your listeners know, was the company that was known for making magnetic tape. It was used in the recording process. And they wanted to get beyond the studio and the tape business and into a record label, and they formed this label. Phil Walden, the president of Capricorn Records, you know, was sort of in charge of the label on their behalf. And so he put this band that we formed, Sundown, together with Ampex, and we did the record. And, you know, the band was together for about a year, and that was it.
Yeah, but you know, what you don't know about the Jake Feinberg show is that I chronicle the most, you know, the crevices and the nuances and the like. That Ampex label had the most offbeat, funky bands. It was just, I just want you to talk to me about the sound of that band, because to me, that was a period of time where all these genres that we now have, these barriers that have gone up in music, labels, were all merging. And I cannot even imagine the fire that was. Could you put a sound on that? I mean, I want to say just it was swamp boogie, but I know it was deeper than that. Could you talk about the sound a little bit?
Well, first of all, we were Southerners, so, you know, the indigenous music of the South, which would include rhythm and blues and soul and country, and of course, during this time, rock and roll had infiltrated the music scene, and we were kind of combining all those things together. And one of the members of the band, a guy named Court Pickett, who was one of the singers, had already had some success with a song called, and if your listeners remember this, it'll be amazing, a song called Motorcycle Mama that was written by a guy named Johnny Weicker, who was from the Muscle Shoals area of Alabama. And they had been on the Dick Clark television show, you know, American Bandstand, and that been on a couple of other television programs, and this record, was in the, I don't know, maybe it was probably the top 20. I don't think it broke the top 10, but it got a lot of record play. So, and it was a pop record. I would call that a novelty pop record, really. And so, Court had some success and brought that to the table. I was learning my trade as a piano player and being influenced by artists like Leon Russell and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and others. I was also listening a little bit to some artists like Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock, and that was beginning to kind of sink in a little bit to me. So
no, I want to hold on. Tell me about briefly what was sinking in about their chops. Like, did you get to see them? What was the first major cat that you saw? Well, I'm sure you saw a lot of the jazzers swing through and play. Did you have an opportunity to play with some of these guys that were playing jazz chords in different modalities and that kind of stuff?
Well, yeah, that was the interest to me. I mean, there were chords that I'd never heard or didn't know how to play or didn't know how to form,
Right.
And I was interested in this. I was trying to learn and get beyond just the rock and roll thing. A little bit later than we're talking about, when I was with Alex Taylor, which would have been, I guess, 1970, and that was the first. Alex, by the way, I know a lot of your listeners may know this, but he was James Taylor's elder brother, now deceased. But Alex was more of a kind of soul guy, soul singer. Didn't really play an instrument, but
no, you're right. It's so great because I have that album, and he's great. I mean, he was always probably in the shadow, but that album was made at Capricorn. But continue anyway. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when we were touring in '70 with Alex Taylor and going all over the country, that was my first experience in doing that. We had a Ford LTD station wagon, put the band and Alex in the wagon, and took off and, went all around the country up into Canada. And we must have put God knows how many miles on that car. But when we're talking about the jazz influence, I remember distinctly when we got to Boston, there was a place called the Jazz Workshop, and right next to it was called Paul's Mall.
Absolutely.
Sister club.
Absolutely. Yeah, I interviewed the owner, Fred Taylor, a couple years ago. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Go ahead.
So that was kind of my first live exposure to listening to jazz. I heard Mose Allison there, who knocked my socks off, and I heard Roshan Roland Kirk.
Oh boy.
And so, that was just mind-boggling. I mean, I couldn't believe these cats, could do what they were doing. And that generated an interest to me to try to expand the borders a little bit and learn more about it. I would never call myself a jazz player. I just don't have the training for that. But, I do my best to let those kind of influences come in and have some kind of effect on my playing. And those guys are masters when you talk about Corea and Hancock, and especially Keith Jarrett is just an amazing musician.
But those are the cats that are the highest profile names. There are dudes yourself. Let's listen to a piece of music because I've been listening with my daughters to this religiously. I can't stop listening to it. It's kind of what hooked me on Chuck Leavell. So let's take a listen to this and we'll come back and break it down. Okay. Regardless of whether you were growing up in the 1950s in Alabama or in 2014 in Tucson, everybody has the come and go blues, and that was that. So, I didn't play out the whole thing, Chuck, but in the third stanza, if that's the right word, you start to play these like chromatic, just playing around. It's just, I can't even describe how hypnotic your playing was. You were able to find a way to have a voice without overpowering anybody. And I realize, I just take it away. Tell me about that album, because it's an important album.
Well, you're very kind, Jack. I appreciate that, and thanks for putting that solo on. When I hear that, of course, you have to appreciate I had just come into the Allman Brothers band. Duane had his tragic accident not even a year prior to that. And the band had gone out as a five-piece band without any replacement with Duane, and which was a very gutsy thing, and I think it was the right thing to do because, there was all these rumors. Who's going to replace Duane Allman? Are they going to call Eric Clapton? Are they going to call Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck? You could never replace Duane.
Yeah, this is a serious topic.
Continue.
Yeah. Again, you have to appreciate there's such an emotional time, not only for the Allman Brothers Band, but for all of us that were living in Macon, Georgia. Duane was our hero, too. All the musicians that were in the family of Capricorn Records there, and the extended family that went beyond that. So, we watched this with great interest to see, and I was still with Alex Taylor at the time, and then had gone to Dr. John during this period that the band went out as a five-piece, and we opened up some concerts for the brothers at that time, and it was just an emotional thing for them, for us, and for the fans.
This was in my head all morning, and I really want you to, if you can articulate it, because I know you were close to the Allman Brothers. Obviously, you weren't in the band yet, but we talk about today overcoming adversity. People talk about us becoming a softer people. We're more sensitive. And I'm thinking back. Okay, Otis Redding dies in a plane crash, and then the Allman Brothers, which, in my mind, they just were this rugged blues bastion, and then they lose this spiritual leader of sorts. And I just wanted you to talk about witnessing that overcome. I'm sure you've done it in your own life, but in that sense, how did they overcome that adversity? Was it how did they figure out how to move forward? Because to me, that is it's one of the most devastating losses in music history.
Well, it truly was a devastating loss, and I think the answer to the question is Duane would have wanted nothing more than the band to carry on. Mm-hmm. He would certainly not have wanted the band to stop. And so I think that was the prevailing feeling and attitude that everyone had. Of course, you're going to go through the grief period, and you're going to be very sad and try to assess the situation. But at the end of the day, you got to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and keep on moving, and that's what Duane would have wanted, and that's what the band did. So after that tour, when the band came back, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 months, post Duane with the five-piece band, they were emotionally drained, emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted. They came off the tour, and everyone wanted to do something different. And Greg wanted to do a solo record. So I got the call to do that, for which turned into, as you know, the Laid Back record, first Greg Allman solo record.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And during the course of the recordings, the rest of the guys in the Allman Brothers were still in town, and so sometimes they would come down and we would jam together after the official Greg Allman sessions. And after a couple of weeks of this, things started feeling pretty good, and I get a call from Phil Walden to say, can you meet in the offices? And, I thought, oh, what did I do wrong? And I go into the office. I had no idea that the rest of the band was going to be there. I thought it was just going to be a meeting with Phil, and he wanted to discuss some, business or whatever. And there's all the guys in the Allman Brothers band in the room. Some pleasantries pass, and then the shoe drops, and they say, listen, the guys feel like, the jams are really going in an interesting direction. They want to know if you want to join the band,
Wow.
Well, I had just barely turned 20 years old, so this was just an incredible shock, but an incredible opportunity for me to do it. So when you get back to playing that solo on Come and Go Blues, maybe that gives you a feeling of what I was experiencing at the time. It was an incredible leap for me musically to join this already established band that were so good and that we admired and loved so much. And, again, at the same time, doing a record with Greg Allman, that was fantastic within itself. And then, okay, Chuck, you're on. The record button is on. You better step up to the plate. And, there was this feeling of fear and excitement and hope and all of these emotions kind of going through me and saying, I've tried so hard to keep my focus. How can I contribute to this band? What's, musically, what kind of playing can I do that will enhance the situation and hopefully, make it go in the direction that they want to go in. I want to please them. I want to try to learn, and that's where I was at the time.
So many things are going through my mind. I mean, I picked up that album, Brothers and Sisters, and there's a couple of the really, the big hit, the big FM hits that really came through. But then I was really looking for that Gutbucket song, and I was like, where is Chuck? What's he doing? And then, so you start off with that solo, and then the next passage, the next set of vocals, you're just kind of laying back a little bit. And then there's a guitar solo, and then the third stanza, I just can't get enough of it. It's like it's the mathematics blending with the spirituality. I mean, mathematics plays a huge role in music, but if you don't have that visceral feel, then the music's going to be flat. And to me, it's just pulsating. Everything is pulsating, but the band had changed. I'm curious, when they offered you the gig, did they want? There was no piano player before you, so did they want you to listen to previous stuff, or because you had already been jamming, it was you're just going to just fit in?
Well, it's interesting you should ask. It was about a year ago, I guess, maybe 2 years ago almost, that they released a 40th. I can't believe I'm saying 40th anniversary. Package of Brothers and Sisters, and it included a lot of as these packages do, unreleased material and rehearsals. And there was some rehearsals that were breaking in. Lamar Williams, the bass player that replaced Barry Oakley after Barry had his tragic accident, and myself, that were preparing us for the live concerts to come. And so they included that on the record, and they consulted me, which was very nice, on some of the material when they were putting this package together, and I went through it and listened to it, and it brought me back to that day and that period of time. They gave me a total free hand, Jake, was the bottom line. I mean, they wanted me to do what I do and bring that to the table with the band, obviously to support when needed. Support is needed, but to step out when it's time to do so. So that, I was just, I was just trying my little rear end off, and trying so hard to make it work. And I was grateful for that opportunity, and it certainly was life-changing for me.
Well, Chuck, I wanted to ask you also, part of my show is about the 4 L's: leadership, love, life, and lineage. And I wanted to ask you, in your own, career as a leader, or even Greg or Dwayne or Dr. John or your mentor, going back, I just think it's so important for younger generations, my daughters included, to know about effective tools for leadership. A lot of people talk about leadership. You need to have a vision, but so many of these cats that I have just burrowed in on from this period of time had such non-traditional leadership forms, and they worked. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about maybe Dwayne or somebody or yourself. What are some of the qualities that make a good, effective leader for a group of people to respond?
Well, that's a very interesting and broad and very big question. But the first couple of things that come to my mind is don't be afraid to fail. You have to find your way, and you're going to fall down a few times. But when you do fail, just pick yourself right back up and keep going. And that if you continue to do that, you'll get better and better, and you'll begin to find the leadership position. Another thing is I talk about the 5 P's sometimes when I give presentations, and that is nothing like the fundamentals, whether you're talking about sports or music or anything. You got to put the hours in. I still put the hours in sitting behind that piano practicing doing scales and Hanon exercises for a couple hours a day, especially when I know I have some activity coming up. And so you got to do that preparation. You got to do the homework. You got to put the blood, sweat, and tears in. and and then I just believe that if you continue doing those things and don't be afraid. I mean, break the fear barrier, right? Break the fear barrier. The most nervous I've ever been in my life was when I first began to give public speaking. It just scared the bejesus out of me. It's so hard sometimes, to get up in front of a group and talk about whatever you're going to talk about and do it lucidly and engagingly. But, the way I got over it was I looked at other speakers. That's another way I think you find leadership is you model those that you admire and you study them and you see the techniques that they use. And then you put those techniques into practice.
Well, Chuck, we got a caller on the line here on Power Talk 1210, and they got a question for you. So let's, Duane. Right. Duane, go ahead.
Hi, hi, Ed. Good morning, good afternoon, where everybody is and stuff. My question is with digital being as it is, and now pretty much taking over studios and stuff like that, recordings and things like that. Are there still bands that still utilize the old analog technologies, the old microphones and stuff? The way, I'm sure that some of the listeners and stuff that to my ears, digital is just too darn sterile, too clean. Whereas analog has got that nice, warm, rounded, wholesome sound and stuff. Are there bands still utilizing the old ways of recording and technology?
Absolutely. A great example is David Grohl and the Foo Fighters. Most of their recordings are done on magnetic tape with the analog domain. And then, of course, you've seen the resurgence of vinyl these days, which I think is fabulous. It's never going to be what it once was. We know that because technology is going to move on no matter what. But I think it's so cool that a lot of artists, Jack White is another one I would mention. He's very interested in preserving those recording techniques and ways and using them and putting things out on vinyl. I'm here right now in Los Angeles working with my friend John Mayer. I have a session. We've had 3 days of sessions. We have a fourth day today. Later on, there's a 2-track magnetic tape machine in the room with us, even though that we are using mostly Pro Tools. The other thing I would say about digital, and I agree, especially the early digital technology has a certain nervous edge to it when you listen to it. You can hear the zeros and ones, right? However, I have to say this. Mm-hmm. As computer technology, communications technology has moved on so quickly, the chips get faster and faster, the technology does get better and better. And so the present-day digital, in my personal opinion, is much, much more sophisticated and better. And finally, I will say this. There's also a lot of hybrid usages where you may do the basic recording in a Pro Tools, and then when you get to the mixing, you put it onto a 2-track magnetic tape to get that warmth. And I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Well, thank you, Duane, for the call here on Power Talk 1210. And Chuck, just buckle up for a minute. We're going to put in another piece of music and come back and get your thoughts on it, okay?
Yeah, man.
All right. We have a game on this show called Name That Tune. Chuck Leavell, can you name that tune?
That's Grand Larceny by Neil Larson.
Oh, you nailed it again. Good for you.
Well, that's quite interesting to hear myself playing organ like that. I love playing the Hammond organ, and these days I rarely get to play a solo like that on the Hammond organ. It's usually relegated to, playing pads and support roles for the organ going on a record. But that it's fun to cut loose on that Hammond sometimes, and that's pretty fun to listen to that solo.
The Jake Feinberg Show is sponsored in part by the Stereo Hospital, with over 40 years of experience repairing all types of home audio equipment, from vintage table radios to digital surround sound, at 4044 East Speedway inside Metronome Music. It's the place to take your turntable, CD player, tape deck, heck, just about anything to do with a stereo. Call 722-4610. Chuck, can you explain, you came from a time where, obviously gospel-infused music, when the organ was going out of the church and into the nightclub. Why has that organ, why is there not an emphasis on having a solo? To me, that organ, Richard Groove Holmes, it goes on, Jack McDuff, it goes on and on. Even Duane, even Greg. It was a staple, it was a solo instrument, it was a power instrument. And why is it that has become now just sort of an accessory or a background noise?
Well, I wish I had a good answer for you. I don't know. I miss it myself. You still hear it on the jazz radio, and I have to give kudos to Joey DeFrancesco, who is really carrying on the flag that Jimmy Smith and, as you mentioned, Brother Jack McDuff and others are known for exposing the Hammond and bringing that to the forefront. Joey is just an unbelievable player. That's just magnificent. So you hear it with cats like Joey, and you hear it on the jazz stations. But, when you're turning on rock and roll radio, every now and then if you hear the classic rock and you hear Steve Winwood, who is another great keyboard player, piano and organ, you'll hear the organ take the forefront. But you're right, for the most part these days, you don't hear it so much.
How much, I should also mention another cat that I had a chance to interview was Booker T. Jones, another great beat. But Leavell, you really are like, it's so classic to be able to talk to somebody who had all these different experiences. Can you talk about a time of adversity for you where you had to dust yourself? I think people talk about these hills they have to climb, and then we always hear it, you got to get up. But if you could talk about a specific instance where you had to, where you had adversity, and yet you just, with your own strength and love and soul, got up off the mat and moved forward, especially maybe early in your career when you didn't know much of anything.
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, Jake, was a period when sea level was coming to an end. This would have been in 1981. We had a fairly good run of it. We'd been together for about 5 years. Some of the personnel had changed. We didn't have the success of an Allman Brothers, but we did pretty good. We sold respectable numbers, and we had a couple of things get on the radio during the time. But then it began to ramp down, and it was inevitable that the band was going to move on. So, towards the end of that, we had some debt that we had to deal with, and it was very painful, and we had to go out and do this, what we call the shopping center tour. We were playing, clubs in these horrible clubs in these shopping centers in Florida and other places throughout, just to try to make enough money to pay off the debt, so we weren't going to get sued by this person or that entity.
Can I just interject? I would have loved to have seen Sea Level at a bowling alley in a shopping center. Personally, I don't need some rock palace. But go ahead. Continue. Yeah, go ahead.
And so it was a very difficult time, but we had a band meeting, and I told the guys, look, I know this is not any fun, but we have to do the honorable thing. We can't just, leave things hanging. We got to go out there and stand up and pay back the people that we owe money to, and let's leave it with a clean slate. So that was difficult. And then after that, Jake, things even went further downhill because the band broke up. My phone was not really ringing for recording sessions. And I had a little trio that I was playing around locally in Macon, and might go to Savannah or go up to the Carolinas, and it was just not going anywhere. But at the same time, and I know you want to get into this, or maybe this is a good entree, my wife had inherited some property from her grandmother, I became very interested in what to do with that property. I wanted to be a good steward of the land. I started studying on land issues and what we would do with this, whether, and as you know, we wound up getting into forestry and growing timber for long-term production. And so all of these things were gelling in my mind. The musical career was kind of dying off. The interest in land was forming in my mind, and I was beginning to pursue it. And so I came home one day, kind of despondent, and talked to my wife, Rose Lane, who's been my life partner and been amazing, and we've been together for 41 years now. And at this time, I wanted to talk to her about this, and I said, "Listen, honey, the phone's not really ringing. I'm not saying I want to quit music, but maybe I should put it to the side for a while and just focus on the land. I'm very interested in this. I'm just kind of confused. I'm not sure which way to go." And so she listened very patiently. At the end of that, she said, "Well, that's all interesting, Chuck, but guess what? The Rolling Stones called you today."
No, I saw that. I mean, I saw that video of you telling that story. It's incredible. That is that's kind of beyond the physical being at that point. You must have almost fainted.
Well, absolutely. And I guess the thing is, never give up.
Right.
I was on the verge of giving up, and then something happened to turn everything around. And I think maybe that's the lesson, is that you shouldn't ever give up. There's I love this story of the guy that wants to learn how to play baseball, but he's out in the country, doesn't have anybody to learn how to play baseball with, so he gets a ball and a bat, and he goes out in the field just all by himself, and he puts the bat in his left hand and his ball in the right hand. He throws the ball up, and he takes a swing, and he misses. But he's determined, and so he picks the ball up and he throws it up again and takes an even tougher swing, but he misses again. Well, third time, right? Same thing. He picks it up and he's steady. He's getting his, his stance together, throws that ball up, takes the biggest swing he can make at it, misses again, picks the ball up, tosses it in the air and says, "Yep, looks like I'm going to be a pitcher."
Exactly. You got to be resourceful, I mean, but this is Chuck, it's so important. I know Jimmy Carter was getting elected, or actually he was finishing his term when you inherited that land. And I just speaking about climate change to you, I just was thinking to myself last night, I'm not going to ask Chuck about, where are we right now? Because as far as I'm concerned, we just lost 30 years of trying to preserve grandmother Earth, as Dr. John calls it. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, can you paint a stark picture of how climate change will impact this country specifically, but more importantly, what we will see down the road as my children get older?
Well, I wish it was a better picture that I could give you, but it's pretty graphic,
Yeah.
I think most of your listeners out there have heard about the rising seas, the melting glaciers. You've seen the television pictures of cities in China where the smog and pollution is just beyond belief. That's the negative side. The positive side is it's not too late, I don't think, in most of the minds of scientists, most of the reports that I've read. But time is getting short, and I just participated in the climate summit at the United Nations. It was really interesting.
Unbelievable. You were, of course, you've been working on your guest speaking, so you must have just shined there.
Well, I was representing a new council that I'm a part of called the Global Restoration Council, and this is a group of people like former Prime Minister Göran Persson of Sweden, former Prime Minister Helen Clark of New Zealand, former President of Brazil Fernando Cardoso, Bill Richardson, former Governor of New Mexico and former ambassador to the United Nations. And so the goal of this council, the reason this exists, is to try to use what influence we can to bring world leaders together to find partnerships with corporations, companies, private individuals that have similar feelings and interests in our challenges, and to restore hopefully over 1 billion acres of land, over the coming years. And when I say land, it's not just about reforestation. Certainly reforestation is a big part of that, but it's also restoring lands to agriculture and to other natural states that would be beneficial for us. And it was a great honor to be there at the UN and participate with these people that are like-minded, and that, is the glass empty or half full? It's certainly half full in my mind. But, Jake, there's so much to do, and it seems daunting at times. And, I'm a little disappointed in the United States not taking as better leadership role in all of this. You see countries like Norway, which are making fantastic progress. Denmark, Denmark has something like 60-65% of renewable energy sources now. Why aren't we doing this? And it baffles me and it frustrates me. But, you got to just keep trying.
Chuck, could you tell me a good Dickey Betts story about early on? Because, he pulled you on his album to play piano on his first solo album. And that cat, he's a gunslinger. And if you could share a great Dickey story, I'd love it.
Oh, well, listen, Dickey was so sweet to me when I first came into the Allman Brothers band, and after we got the Brothers and Sisters record recorded and we started to go tour, and we were out in Oklahoma. And at the time, Dickey had married a Native American woman, and of course we all know the song Blue Sky was written for her, and her name was Sandy, and Sandy Blue Sky. So we're in Oklahoma with a couple of days, actually 3 or 4 days off. And Dickey came to me and he said, and my wife, Roseline, was with me at the time. We were, touring together. And he said, would you guys like to go to a Native American reservation and participate and hang out for a couple of days? And, yeah, I would love to do that. So It was so sweet, man. And we met, I'll never forget, we met this guy, Chief Daniel Beaver, who only spoke in the native Creek language. And we listened to the interpretation by a guy named Chief Stanley Smith. And Beaver was telling the story of the Trail of Tears, and it was just absolutely so moving to hear it in his language and then have it interpreted. And I'll always thank Dickey Betts for that experience. It was one of the most memorable experiences I ever had. But in terms of his musicianship, Dickey could be the best guitar player in the world on any given night. Now, look, he's a volatile personality, and, he could get frustrated sometimes and even throw his guitar down and walk off stage, which bothered us all no end. But, boy, when he was on, there was nobody could touch him.
Yeah, it's kind of like Freddie Hubbard, the trumpet player. He was so insane. Sometimes if the audience wasn't listening, he'd scream and yell at them to listen and sort of ostracize it. But then he made up for it because he was so on point, that he was so good that it overcame all his eccentricities. Chuck, just my question is that on the Brothers and Sisters album, you open it up, there you are. Where is that picture with that log cabin? That's not Capricorn Records. That's where is that? I want to put myself back in that is the Southern sanctuary that Jake Feinberg wants to dwell in. So please tell me where that was.
Well, that took place on a property that the Allman Brothers Band had pooled their money and bought, and I think it was something like 400 or 500 acres. It's north of Macon. For those that know the geographic layout of Georgia, Macon is quite in the center of the state, and Atlanta is a little bit 100 miles above that. So halfway, or not quite halfway, from Macon up going to Atlanta is a little city called Forsyth. And it was in that general area. It wasn't in the city of Forsyth, but it was in that general vicinity that the farm was. And they had just bought that property, I think, not long before I joined the band. Dickey had built a house out there. I think he was actually, it was still under construction when we took that picture. We had horses out there, and, we were living the, kind of the communal utopian life was the idea. And so it's a huge picture. Those of you that have seen that album cover, when you open up the album and you see, 20, 25 people sitting on a deck out in this farm that we're talking about. And, of course, the title of the record, Brothers and Sisters, reflected that utopian goal and concept and idea. At the end of the day, as we know, it didn't quite all work out that way, but at the time, it was an incredible place, an incredible feeling.
Has that been maybe the most collectively? What should I say? You said it was utopia. Was that ever recreated, maybe with sea level at some point, or did it ever? I mean, what's so fascinating is that you came in amidst tragedy, and yet what came out of it was beauty. I mean, you look at that bunch of people; it's just a wonderful amalgamation of America. And was there ever any better time? Was there another utopia? Maybe the forest farms. You tell me. I mean, was there anything that got to that utopic stage for Chuck Leavell?
Well, I think you pretty much nailed it when you said that, because I'm living that life now. My wife Rosalane and I have about 2,900 acres of land that we manage for long-term forestry, and we manage the wildlife on it. We live on the property. When I'm not touring, I'm up at about 5:30 in the morning, go maybe get a little workout in my gym, and then, see what the day might bring. I might get on a tractor and do some work. I might get on a horse and ride in the woods. And I love the duality that I have now, Jake. It's just incredible. I get to rock and roll and come out and play with these artists that I love playing with so much, whether it's the Stones or my pal John Mayer here or the others that I've been fortunate to work with. And then when I get home, I'm in the woods, and I love the Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, in the woods we return to reason and faith. And that's what it's all about for me when I'm back home.
Well, I was going to ask you as we wrap up here, if you don't mind, there's a lot more I wanted to cover with you, and I was hoping we could find the time to do part 2 when you get back to the farm.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, man. And maybe this is a good way to wrap things up. And I'm like you, I wish I could go on for another hour or so. But, we haven't mentioned the Mother Nature Network, which is our website, mnn.com. And my partner Joel Babbitt and I put this together, and the short of it is we released, basically we saw a void on the internet for a really comprehensible, shall we say, the WebMD for the environment. And we were fortunate to get some resources to start this in 2009. We launched on a wing and a prayer, and lo and behold, now we're getting over 8 million visits a month, and even more impressive is the page views, because that tells you that people are staying on the site, they're exploring, they're going to different pages, and we're getting about 30 million page views a month now. So I would invite your listeners to check out mnn.com, the Mother Nature Network.
What can they expect to see as far as visuals? I mean, this is fascinating. It's a great. The WebMD for the environment was lacking, so that's an amazing idea.
Well, it's interesting when people go to WebMD, they don't put WebMD.com. They say, broken ankle or heart trouble or whatever it might be. And so when we're very good at search engine optimization, SEO, and so when you Google up recycling, or you Google up electric cars or anything to do with the environment, we're usually in the top 5 on the Google search engines. And so that's what we want to be. We want to be that resource when people have any question about any aspect of the environment. Look, there's other sites out there like, shall we say, River Keepers or Sierra Club or Isaac Walton League, and these are great sites, but they're dedicated to one aspect of the environment, not the whole big picture. And again, that's what WebMD is to help, is the big picture, and that's what we want to be for the environment. And I'm pleased to say the success has been great. We want to be that resource for people that have any question about how to lower their carbon footprint, lower energy use, find ways to live better and to be kinder for the planet. We want to be that resource.
Chuck Leavell, it was just an honor. I look forward to doing another full session with you. When are you going to be back on the farm?
Well, I leave Monday from here in L.A. To go back, and then we have a wonderful event coming up. Our daughter, Ashley, is getting married October the 18th, and then the very next day I leave for Australia to hook back up with the Stones and do about a month down under, and I certainly look forward to that.
Well, hopefully we can sneak something in before you go. We'll be in touch, all right? And it was really, thank you so much for being part of the Jake Feinberg Show, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, Jake, you are the man. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this.
All right, man. Have a ball. Take it easy, man. We'll talk to you soon.
You got it.
All
Bye-bye.
right. We'll be back with more of the Jake Feinberg Show on Power Talk 1210 after this.
A few times, but I don't understand. I just like to play the blues. It's not all the money that I want. I just like to play the blues. And I like for everybody to get together and all of us play the blues. Let's have a good time. Because blues is where it's at. I'm telling you, I love it. I can't help but play it. So when you wake up in the morning,
You're a gig.
and ain't got no money, or no gig, whatever.